paid $26 million and you
paid nothing.
You accuse me of not paying taxes? Let me show you what happens when someone who actually doesn't pay taxes stands in my courtroom. Judge Judy Files' voice cut through the courtroom like a blade, her words precise and surgical, slicing through the charged air with the kind of authority that comes from 30 years of dismantling liars on national television. The bailiff, standing near the plaintiff's table, stiffened instinctively, his hand moving toward the stack of folders resting on the judge's elevated bench. Karen Rodriguez, seated in the defendant's chair, her fingers gripping a coffee-stained manila folder like a lifeline, froze mid-breath, her confident smirk evaporating like morning dew under harsh sunlight. The gallery, packed with spectators who'd waited hours in line hoping for exactly this kind of confrontation, leaned forward in unison, their murmurs fading into a tense, expectant silence that pressed against the wood-paneled walls like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Court reporters in the front row, their stenotype machines humming softly moments before, paused mid-stroke, fingers hovering above keys as if the very act of recording had become secondary to witnessing what was about to unfold. The overhead lights, harsh fluorescent tubes that cast everything in clinical, unforgiving clarity, seemed to burn brighter in that moment, throwing long shadows across Karen's face as her rehearsed expression of righteous indignation began to crack like dried paint under pressure. Behind the glass partition separating the gallery from the proceedings, producers whispered urgently into their headsets, their eyes glued to monitors displaying multiple camera angles, each one capturing a different facet of the woman whose spectacular miscalculation was about to detonate in real time. That single sentence, delivered with the calm precision Judge Judy had honed over decades of separating fact from fiction, truth from desperate fabrication, wasn't just a response. It was a declaration of war, a trap that had been meticulously set the moment Karen had opened her mouth and made the single most catastrophic error anyone could make in that courtroom. She'd attacked Judge Judy's integrity. And Judge Judy, with her stack of IRS records, financial disclosures, and decades of transparent tax documentation, was about to teach Karen Rodriguez, and everyone watching, what happens when you weaponize false accusations against someone who plays by the rules. But how did it come to this? What twisted logic led Karen Rodriguez, a woman already facing serious financial fraud charges, to believe that accusing Judge Judy Files, one of the most financially transparent public figures in television, of tax evasion would somehow help her case? What desperate strategy convinced her that deflection through false accusation would work in a courtroom presided over by a woman who'd heard every con, every manipulation, every pathetic attempt at misdirection thousands of times before? And Judge Judy, her folder already open to the page that would seal Karen's fate, prepared to deliver a lesson in consequences that would leave Karen Rodriguez not just defeated, but financially destroyed. The courtroom was a cathedral of accountability, its wood-paneled walls worn smooth by decades of testimony, seeming to absorb the tension radiating from every corner of the space like thirsty earth drinking rain. Rows of spectators filled every available seat, shoulder pressed against shoulder, their phones silenced, but screens glowing faintly beneath cupped hands as they prepare to capture what their instincts, honed by years of watching daytime television justice, told them would be a case they'd replay for years. Behind the thick glass partition, producers in dark suits moved like chess players calculating moves ahead, their fingers dancing across control boards, adjusting camera angles with the precision of surgeons, their voices crackling through headsets in urgent whispers that nobody in the gallery could hear, but everyone could sense hanging in the air like static electricity before a lightning strike. Judge Judy's bench, elevated 3 feet above the floor and crafted from dark mahogany that gleamed under the lights like polished obsidian, commanded the space like a throne of judgment, a place where truth was the only accepted currency and lies were debts that always came due, with interest compounding by the second. Camera 1, positioned to the judge's left, zoomed in slowly, its lens focusing with mechanical precision on the micro-expressions that would later be dissected frame by frame in viral clips shared millions of times across platforms Judge Judy didn't even know existed. Camera 3 held steady on Karen Rodriguez, capturing her appearance. A wrinkled business suit that had seen better days, unwashed hair pulled into a hasty ponytail, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting desperation. She clutched that coffee-stained manila folder against her chest like ancient armor that might somehow protect her from what was coming. Her bitten fingernails, chipped red polish still clinging to the edges, drumming an anxious, arrhythmic pattern against the worn cardboard. Beside her sat her attorney, a public defender barely 30 years old in an ill-fitting navy suit that bunched at the shoulders, his eyes darting nervously between his client and the judge, shuffling papers that he clearly hadn't reviewed as thoroughly as he should have. Already sensing this case was going somewhere he desperately didn't want to follow. Karen Rodriguez had spent the last 3 years building what prosecutors would later call a house of cards constructed from bad checks and broken promises. She'd opened 17 credit cards under variations of her name: Karen M. Rodriguez K., Michelle Rodriguez, Karen Rodriguez Martinez, each one maxed out within weeks of approval. She'd bounced checks at 4 different banks, racked up $63,000 in unpaid personal loans, and somehow convinced 3 separate car dealerships to approve leases she never intended to pay. When the lawsuits started piling up, 12 different creditors seeking judgments that could collectively destroy her financially for decades, she'd done what desperate people always do when cornered. She'd lied. She'd claimed identity theft, forged documents suggesting she'd been hospitalized during the times she'd been shopping online with stolen credentials, even manufactured fake death certificates for relatives who were still very much alive and understandably furious about being declared deceased. Judge Judy Files, in her 31st year of presiding over small claims disputes that revealed the best and worst of human nature, had built an empire on 3 foundational principles: be prepared, tell the truth, and never assume anyone in her courtroom was being honest until they proved otherwise. Her reputation was legendary. A former family court judge who'd become the highest-paid television personality in history through sheer force of will and uncompromising standards. She'd published her tax returns voluntarily. She disclosed every penny of her $47 million annual salary. She'd paid more in taxes in 1 year than most people earn in a lifetime, and she'd done it gladly, publicly, transparently, because that's what integrity looked like when it wasn't just a word but a lived practice. When Karen Rodriguez's case had landed on her desk, buried in a stack of potential episodes flagged by producers who knew gold when they saw it, something had immediately caught her attention. Not just the obvious fraud. That was standard fare, the daily bread of small claims court. But the note attached from Karen's preliminary deposition, typed in bold red letters by a paralegal who'd clearly recognized its significance. Defendant claims entire legal system is corrupt. Judges don't pay fair share of taxes. Judge Judy had smiled that thin, dangerous smile that her bailiff had learned to recognize over 2 decades as the smile of a predator that had just spotted wounded prey stumbling into its territory. She made 2 phone calls, one to her accountant, requesting complete tax documentation for the past 5 years, one to the IRS, exercising her right to obtain Karen Rodriguez's tax compliance records through legal discovery. And she brought receipts, mountains of receipts. The consolidated case was straightforward in its scope, if staggering in its implications. 12 creditors had joined forces, pooling their individual claims into one massive judgment action against Karen Rodriguez. Credit card companies sought $43,000 in unpaid debt, plus interest and penalties that had compounded over 3 years of deliberate non-payment. Auto dealerships demanded $28,000 for 3 vehicles that had been repossessed, but not before Karen had stripped them of their GPS systems, removed the tires, and somehow sold the custom rims on online marketplaces, a detail that would become darkly relevant later. Personal loan companies chased $67,000 in principal that had ballooned to nearly $90,000 with 2 years of compounding interest. Medical billing companies wanted $15,000 for procedures Karen had never intended to pay for. Cosmetic work, elective surgeries, dental veneers that gleamed white in her social media photos, even as her bank account perpetually sat in the negative. The total, $201,347.82. Before we dive into the 36 seconds that destroyed Karen Rodriguez's entire life. And trust me when I say you won't believe how fast Judge Judy dismantles her. Hit that subscribe button if you love watching accountability served ice cold by the one judge who doesn't play games. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever seen someone make a worse decision in court? Stay with me. This gets absolutely brutal. Judge Judy adjusted her glasses, sliding them up the bridge of her nose with her index finger. A gesture anyone familiar with her show recognized instantly as the calm before the storm, the moment when her razor-sharp analytical mind shifted into execution mode. She glanced down at the file spread open before her, pages marked with dozens of colored tabs, green for financial records, yellow for legal precedents, red for evidence of fraud, blue for IRS documentation. Then lifted her gaze back to Karen, her expression unreadable, neutral in a way that made experienced courtroom observers lean forward with anticipation, recognizing the stillness of a coiled spring waiting for the precise moment to release its stored energy. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, their persistent buzz the only sound in the tense silence that had settled over the courtroom like heavy fog muffling all other noise. The bailiff shifted his weight subtly, his hand resting near the evidence folders stacked on the side table, ready to move at the judge's slightest indication. The court reporter's fingers hovered above her stenotype machine, motionless, waiting for the exchange to begin. In the gallery, a woman in the third row held her breath, her phone recording discreetly despite the posted prohibition, already knowing instinctively that this would be one for the permanent archives. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Judy began, her voice conversational, but carrying an edge sharp enough to draw blood if you listened carefully enough. You're here because 12 different creditors have filed judgments against you totaling just over $200,000. That's not a small amount. That's not a mistake or a misunderstanding. That's a pattern of behavior spanning multiple years. Do you dispute owing this money? Karen shifted in her seat, straightening her spine with false bravado, her chin lifting in that particular way desperate people adopt when they're about to make everything exponentially worse for themselves. Your Honor, she said, her voice pitching higher with manufactured confidence that rang hollow in the acoustics of the room. I dispute the legitimacy of this entire proceeding. This court, this system, it's rigged against people like me while people at the top. She gestured vaguely, dismissively, toward the bench, play by completely different rules. The gallery stirred immediately, a ripple of surprised murmurs spreading through the seats like wind moving through wheat fields. The bailiff's eyebrows rose fractionally, his professional mask slipping for just a moment. Camera 2 zoomed in on Judge Judy's face, capturing the precise moment her expression shifted from neutral observation to dangerously focused attention, like a microscope lens adjusting to bring bacteria into crystal clear, damning focus. Judge Judy set down her pen with deliberate care, the soft click of metal against wood echoing in the suddenly tense space with the finality of a gavel striking. Different rules, she repeated, her tone completely flat, devoid of inflection, which somehow made the words more ominous than if she dripped them with sarcasm. Explain exactly what you mean by that, Ms. Rodriguez. I want to hear you spell out your accusation clearly for this court record. Karen, apparently mistaking the judge's calm for weakness or perhaps too committed to her disastrous strategy to recognize the cliff edge she was approaching, leaned forward eagerly, her coffee-stained folder clutched to her chest like a shield that might deflect the consequences of what she was about to say. I mean that regular people like me get absolutely crucified for minor financial mistakes, while rich people, including judges who make millions of dollars every year, find ways to avoid paying their fair share. The system protects the wealthy and punishes everyone else. Gasps rippled through the gallery, sharp and involuntary, spreading like concentric circles from a stone dropped in still water. Reporters in the press section, who'd been half paying attention while checking their phones for other stories, suddenly sat up straight, pens moving across notepads with renewed urgency. The producers behind the glass exchanged wide-eyed glances, their previous calculations about this episode's potential viewership suddenly requiring dramatic upward revision. One whispered into her headset, her voice tight with excitement and disbelief, "Did she just?" "She did," the director confirmed, his finger hovering over controls as if he could somehow capture this moment twice, preserve it in amber for posterity and promotional clips that would run for years. Judge Judy's expression didn't change. Not a flicker, not a twitch, but something in the air shifted perceptibly, a subtle redistribution of power that everyone in the room felt simultaneously, like barometric pressure dropping precipitously before a tornado touches down. "You're suggesting," she said slowly, each word measured and precise, weighted with the care of a demolitions expert handling volatile materials, "that I personally don't pay my fair share of taxes?" Karen, either not recognizing the danger signs that were flashing like emergency beacons to everyone else in the courtroom, or too deeply committed to her catastrophic strategy to retreat now, nodded vigorously, her ponytail bobbing with the false confidence of someone who'd convinced themselves they were making a brilliant tactical move. "I'm saying what everyone knows, Your Honor. Rich people have expensive accountants and legal loopholes. The rest of us don't have those advantages. So I'm just asking, how much did you pay in taxes last year? Because I bet it's nowhere near what you should have paid based on your income." The courtroom erupted. Gasps detonated through the gallery like firecrackers on a string, sharp and overlapping, each spectator's shock feeding into and amplifying the others. The bailiff actually took a step backward, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to something approaching sympathy. Not for Karen, but for what was about to happen to her, the judicial equivalent of watching someone step on a landmine in slow motion. Court reporters' fingers flew across their machines with increased intensity, capturing every word of what they recognized instinctively as a career-defining moment, the kind of exchange that would be referenced in legal circles for years. In the press row, phones emerged from pockets despite the no-recording policy, journalists recognizing with the instincts honed from covering thousands of courtroom proceedings that they were witnessing something extraordinary, the kind of moment that would be analyzed in legal ethics classes and replayed in compilation videos titled Top 10 Worst Courtroom Mistakes. The other attorney at the plaintiff's table, representing the consolidated creditors, sat perfectly still, his expression frozen somewhere between professional detachment and barely suppressed glee at watching his opponent commit spectacular legal suicide on record. Judge Judy sat back in her chair, folding her hands on the bench with the kind of deliberate calm that veteran prosecutors recognize instantly as the moment before a trap springs shut with mechanical precision. She let the silence stretch, watching Karen's confident expression begin to falter as the defendant slowly, painfully realized that everyone in the courtroom, the gallery spectators, the bailiff, the court reporters, the attorneys, even her own public defender who'd buried his face in his hands, was staring at her with expressions ranging from slack-jawed disbelief to abject horror at what she'd just done. "Ms. Rodriguez," Judge Judy said finally, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room with perfect acoustic clarity, "you've just made an accusation. A very specific, very serious accusation about my personal tax compliance and financial integrity. Do you understand what you've just done? Do you comprehend the magnitude of what you've said on the record in open court?" Karen swallowed hard, her Adam's apple bobbing visibly above the collar of her wrinkled suit, a bead of sweat forming at her hairline and beginning its slow journey down her temple. I'm just saying what people think, what everyone suspects about the system." "No," Judge Judy interrupted, her voice still quiet but now carrying an edge like broken glass wrapped in silk. "You've accused a sitting judge, on the record, in open court, of tax evasion. That's not opinion. That's not commentary on systemic issues. That's defamation. That's a specific allegation of criminal conduct. And I'm about to show you exactly why you should have kept your mouth shut and focused on defending yourself against the actual charges you're facing. The courtroom's atmosphere thickened perceptibly, tension coiling like a spring wound to its absolute breaking point, the potential energy building toward inevitable release. The overhead lights seemed to intensify, casting harsh shadows across Karen's face that accentuated every bead of sweat now forming in a visible line across her forehead. Her hands trembled visibly as she clutched her pathetic folder. Her collection of unsubstantiated conspiracy theories printed from internet forums and screenshot images from social media posts claiming all judges were corrupt, realizing far too late that she'd just challenged someone who'd arrived to this battle armed with facts, documentation, and official government records while she'd brought nothing but desperation, delusion, and spectacularly poor judgment. The bailiff moved to the judge's bench, accepting a thick folder that Judge Judy had pulled from her meticulously organized stack. The folder was black, professional, bound with official clasps, and easily 3 inches thick with documentation. Camera 3 zoomed in on it as the bailiff carried it back to the evidence table, the lens capturing the official IRS seal on the cover sheet visible through the clear plastic protector, the golden emblem gleaming under the courtroom lights like a badge of irrefutable authority. Karen's confident smirk evaporated completely, replaced by the dawning horror of someone who'd just realized they'd jumped out of an airplane without checking if they'd actually strapped on a parachute or merely a backpack full of stones. Judge Judy opened the folder with deliberate slowness, the rustle of official documents unnaturally loud in the hushed courtroom. She adjusted her glasses one final time, turned to the first tab section, and began to speak. Ms. Rodriguez, since you made a public accusation about my tax compliance, let me make something very, very clear to you and everyone watching. She lifted the first document, holding it up so both cameras and gallery could see the official letterhead, the government seals, the signatures of IRS commissioners. This is my IRS Form 1040 for the most recent tax year. It's public record. I file it voluntarily, along with all schedules and supporting documentation, because transparency matters when you hold public trust. She set it down with a deliberate thump that echoed through the silent space. My adjusted gross income, $47 million. My total federal tax paid, $18,400,000. That's an effective tax rate of 39.1%. She paused, letting the numbers sink in like anchors dropping into deep water. I paid more in taxes in one single year, Ms. Rodriguez, than you've earned in your entire lifetime. Gasps erupted throughout the gallery, louder this time, spreading through the seats like shockwaves from an explosion. Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her face draining of what little color remained. Her attorney slumped lower in his chair, possibly contemplating career changes that wouldn't involve being present for moments like this. Stop right there. Just stop and appreciate what's happening. In less than 30 seconds, Judge Judy just pulled out official IRS documentation showing she paid $18 million in taxes while Karen sits there having paid nothing. If you're loving this absolute masterclass in preparation destroying desperation, smash that subscribe button right now, because we bring you the most satisfying accountability content on YouTube. Drop a comment. What would you say if you were Karen's attorney watching this unfold? And what punishment does she deserve for this accusation? Because we're not done. The complete financial destruction is still coming, and it gets so much worse. Judge Judy wasn't finished. She flipped to the second tab with precise, deliberate movements that suggested she had all day and was prepared to use every minute of it. State taxes, California, where I reside and pay full residency obligations. Total paid, $6,200,000. Another document held up for the cameras, another government seal catching the light. Property taxes on my 3 homes, paid in full every year without complaint. $1,100,000 annually. Another page turned. Sales taxes based on disclosed purchases and luxury items. $417,000. She pulled yet another document, her rhythm methodical, relentless, Each piece of evidence another nail in the coffin Karen had built for herself. Social Security and Medicare taxes, which I pay despite being well above the income cap, where most wealthy people stop contributing. $387,000. A slight pause for emphasis. Charitable contributions fully documented, verified by the IRS, and entirely legal deductions. $9 million to various nonprofits and causes. Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes locked on Karen's face like targeting lasers, watching the defendant physically shrink in her chair with each number. Total taxes paid across all categories for the most recent year. $26,504,000. I contributed more to federal, state, and local governments than most small towns generate in annual revenue. And you, Ms. Rodriguez, you who owe creditors over $200,000, you who haven't filed a tax return in 6 years, have the audacity, the unmitigated gall to stand in my courtroom and suggest I don't pay my fair share. Karen's face had gone from pale to gray to an almost greenish hue, her hands now visibly shaking as reality crashed down with the weight of 26 million pieces of evidence. Judgment for the plaintiffs, $263,000, including legal fees. I'm referring your case to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division for tax evasion prosecution. You'll face federal charges, Ms. Rodriguez. Your bankruptcy won't save you from tax debt or fraud judgments. This is what happens when you lie in my courtroom. Karen collapsed in her chair, destroyed, as the bailiff prepared her exit from a courtroom she should never have entered with lies. If this demonstration of why you never accused Judge Judy of anything without proof gave you the justice satisfaction you needed today, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss another accountability moment. Drop a comment. Should Karen face jail time for tax evasion? What's the worst courtroom mistake you've ever seen? Share this video with anyone who needs to see what happens when preparation meets desperation. Smash that like button if Judge Judy is your hero, because after watching her pay $26 million in taxes while exposing someone who paid $0, she's everyone's hero. Remember, integrity isn't negotiable. Accusations require evidence, and you'll never, ever win against someone who brings receipts to court.